our data visualization panel, and it is moderated by Sean Gonzales, who is a data scientist consultant. Sorry, having a hard time reading my notes. We have Andrew Turner from Estri. Is that right? We have Amy from Sunlight Foundation and Maureen and Brian from USA Today Gannett. So without further ado, the data visualization panel.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask you guys to participate a little bit during all of this, but I'm going to try to group it into a couple different topics having to do with languages that are used for different data visualizations. So if you've got a question about language, let's get ready for that. The practical applications of data visualization, user experience, user interface design, data science, how that relates to data visualization, and of course information architecture. So if the timing goes right, I'm not sure which one I'll get to. It'll depend on the conversation, but that's kind of the different topics I'm thinking about right now. And I thought that maybe we would introduce ourselves in a little bit more detail, just talk about ourselves in a self-centered way a little bit. As Lisa pointed out, I'm a data science consultant. I co-founded Data Community DC in late 2012. Used to work in DoD, and I learned what's now called data science. Some people kind of laugh at that idea a little bit because they used to be statistician, and now they're called data scientists, and in 5 years they'll be called something else, and they're still doing the same thing. But I learned what I did doing work for Department of Defense, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and then last year went independent. And I think that's enough for myself. You want to go?
Great, thank you. My name is Andrew Turner. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Esri's R&D lab here in Washington, D.C. We're a GIS mapping company. My background is actually in aerospace engineering. I used to work and build autonomous self-learning spacecraft systems, and I got interested in how do we put the capabilities of satellite technology and imagery into the hands of citizens. So now I build a lot of tools to make it very easy for anybody to go and visualize their own geographic data analysis, whether it's for citizens telling stories and doing what I call neo-geography, or I also do and co-founded a group called Crisis Commons, which allows volunteers to spend their weekends or spare time helping respond to disasters, whether it's mapping an OpenStreetMap, building visualizations and analysis tools, or otherwise providing technical assistance.
Hi, I'm Amy Cesal. I'm a graphic designer at the Sunlight Foundation. And the Sunlight Foundation, if you don't know about us, we're a nonpartisan nonprofit, and what we do is we make government more open and transparent through technology. So what does that actually mean? It means we have a bunch of APIs, we use a bunch of data sets that we collect from the government and scrape different government sites to create, and we build other things. We build tools that normal people can use. We help reporters use that data and just make it more accessible. So with those tools, we do a lot of data visualization, and I'm a graphic designer, so I do the front end to all those. I create what you actually see, so that's kind of what I do.
My name's Maureen Linke. I work at Gannett Digital / USA Today. So mainly a lot of the work that I do is for USA Today, but then it's also for our 80 local newspapers and 30 plus TV stations. So one of the things that I work on is the large data-driven interactive projects that we produce for USA Today. And then I also work on the tools and templates that we make for other journalists to do data visualizations and graphics reporting more easily and without development resources. So a big part of my job is as a producer, as a graphics reporter, but then I also do build and help design data-driven interactives.
And I'm going to have to cuddle because... All right, I think this one works too. So no cuddling. So I work with Maureen at USA Today and Gannett Digital. I'm an IA there. So a lot of what she says I don't need to say. But I do a variety of things there. I mean, I work on data visualization projects. I work on product level projects, primarily mobile projects these days. I've worked on the CMS that we use at Gannett Digital that all of our Gannett properties use across the country. Yeah, that's what I do.
Cool. Lisa, could you bring up that one that I navigated to earlier. Yeah, that one. So I wanted to start off, we've been actually talking for the past, I don't know, 45 minutes or something like that, and there was one point that was a little bit controversial, or, you know, got the juices flowing a little bit. This is how... Okay, stay over here. It was tough because I wanted to go point at that one. So that is a visualization of pi. Okay, 3.14159. Each one of the arcs around the top is a number. So you have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And each line is a line from one digit to the next. So 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, 9, and whatever the next one is, all the way out to infinity. For those who don't know, it goes on forever. And we were talking about accuracy of things versus communicating the point of something. And so I guess I'll start, Amy, with you, because you're talkative. And, you know, just say whatever you want.
So from my perspective, I hate stuff like this. I think Sean and I differ very much in what we think is good data visualization. So this, I actually looked at it the other day, and you could do this with any imaginary number. It shows nothing specifically about pi. Like, how would this be different than anything else? And it doesn't have data labels. It might be pretty, but it's not communicating any other information to the user. And so that's kind of one of the things that I think about data visualization, is that it needs to respect the data and to make a point that you couldn't get by just reading things. It helps make things clearer. It makes things more identifiable and something that you can gain other information from. This is just pretty, and to me, slightly nonsensical, which I guess is pi, but it's not helping me understand pi any more than just seeing it written out. It might actually be more confusing than that.
Yeah, actually, well, can you pull up the other tab I had? There's on the, I think it was on this machine on my right. So yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I think these are interesting, right? They're compelling, and it's worthwhile thinking about what are the different goals of a visualization. Obviously, when you're going into doing a visualization, is thinking about what's the outcome I want to have with it. You just start click and play. If it's just compelling and it's fun, that's great. From a map, when I do mapping, but I think this applies to a lot of other visualizations, a lot of times there's something that's informative that needs to happen, and there's a decision that needs to be made. So what should happen here, if the video is actually, doesn't look like it's running. Play, thank you. This is a visualization of Twitter during Sandy. What is it's viewing every time someone mentioned the word Sandy or power outage, right? And this is your typical kind of social media visualization. That's interesting, it's fun. You don't know what the heck's going on. Like, there's people tweeting, they're in Manhattan. Wow, digital natives live in Manhattan, not very surprising. They're talking about a storm. So what we started doing was, well, how do you actually do a visualization to drive action and understanding? Where's the pattern of people that are seeing more power outages? So we're applying here just basic geographic analysis to it. This is called spatial aggregation. So what this is now showing is just where are the tweets by 1 kilometer grid cell. So this is a little better. You can start seeing patterns here, and this is a different type of visualization. But again, it's just showing you now the density, again, of people tweeting. So at least I can see where people are tweeting in one area more than another area, but I don't know what to expect on that. If I'm a disaster responder or FEMA, do I know where to go send people? So now here's a visualization that we set up that actually does more complex analysis that actually compares the number of people tweeting about a topic as compared to the number of people I would expect to be tweeting about that topic. It's called normalization. Essentially, I want to know income by population, or in this case, what are the tweets by population? How many do I expect? Where are the outliers of these things? So now we're doing this aggregation here, and we're visualizing that, and that's kind of interesting. But in this case, we're trying to make a decision with it. We're trying to find out where is there a problem that's occurring. And you can see nice little histograms and spatial and non-spatial charting and visualization. But what we've done is we've set up a criteria here. We've determined when is this interesting. When are people tweeting excessively more about a topic, about a power outage that I would expect, and helping lead people to that actual awareness and actually calling that out. So the visualization is helping you see it and be aware of it, but it's not ignorable that all of a sudden these red blinking areas are now where people are tweeting more, a power unit, a transformer exploded, they lost power. And now the visualization now drives action where people can now, FEMA can know where to send water, where to send trucks, where to get people evacuated from. So it's a visualization that has to be accurate because you have people on the ground that are about to go into a flooded area that are actually able to now use the visualization to take action and then measure the result of that action. And that's something that I think a lot about, over a pie visualization, which is cool, to something that actually is going to hopefully save people's lives or at least help them save money over time. That's something that's really important when you start thinking about what your visualizations are for. Sorry, it's very long-winded.
You can answer if you want, or we can just move on.
What was the question?
We'll just move on. Actually, this makes me think of the data science integration with data visualization. Does anybody have any questions about data science and data viz specifically? So do you integrate data science much with your visualizations at USA Today?
As far as from a data science perspective goes, we have two specific people on my team who are more involved with doing that sort of work as far as using Python and things like that to go to APIs and get and gather data and clean data. And then from there, it's how do we make this data more interesting than just a giant spreadsheet of numbers? How do we help people make better decisions based on all of these numbers? So one example of a project that we did recently was when all of the data came out about the new healthcare plans all across the country and the different metal level plans, gold, silver, bronze, and platinum. And so that was just a really ugly spreadsheet that had tons of numbers on it. And so we visualized it in a map that kind of shaded based on where different areas were more expensive, where it was more expensive for a family versus a single person, things like that. So I think that's a great example of where people could look up their county anywhere in the country and get that information in a way that maybe they wouldn't have because they wouldn't want to spend a lot of time staring at a giant Microsoft Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, especially from a journalism perspective. It's how do you contextualize visualization, right? There's one thing to say, oh, that's what's happening overall. But at the end, it's like, what does it mean to that person or from their context? Right? One of the visualization you had up there was, what does it mean for zip code, but what does it mean if I'm a parent of kids? What happens if it means if I'm in an urban area or a rural area, right? What does it actually mean? What's the lessons I take away from it? Which is cool now, I think, with digital journalism and visualization, is the ability, you're not telling one story for everybody, you're giving the tooling for people to discover their own story.
Well, and that's what we always try to do with our larger data visualization projects, is we try to give you that broader national view, but then allow you to be able to drill down to your county or your zip code level to find out how relevant that information is to you. So it's always that idea of giving the broad view and then allowing people to drill down into the more narrow view to where the data really is more meaningful to them.
Yeah, I was thinking, Brian, that
you
really have to do this on a regular basis of coordinating all these different points of view and trying to bring them together in some sort of product, right?
Yeah, I think sort of to maybe go back and piggyback on the previous question a little bit. I agree with you. This pie is not very helpful for me. I agree with Andrew. I mean, what are we ultimately trying to give to our users? Like, what information? How are we trying to help them? I feel like the method we use to get there is not so important. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just how can I provide additional value, or how can I make this content more useful to our readers? And I think whatever solution we come up with that's just how we measure it. Whether a text story is good enough, that's fine. If you have something complex like healthcare, data visualization is going to be a whole lot more helpful than just giving everyone a spreadsheet to download. So I think just finding the best tool or the best solution, given the context of what you're trying to share, is really how we measure things.
Actually, I'll piggy. You said measure things. I'm curious with yours, like probably everyone here who's built a website actually measures click traffic, people coming in, dwell times, interaction. With your visualizations, do you actually learn over time? And same for you. I mean, do you learn over time how people are using the visualizations, how to make the next one more compelling? So there's higher dwell times, there's more exploration clicking, there's more sharing. So you actually learn to improve your visualizations or determine there was a new story there that you didn't even realize until someone else drilled into it and they published their own blog post with your visualizations. Oh, sorry.
Sure. So at the Sunlight Foundation, we do a lot of stuff in-house. We don't quite measure click traffic as much as we measure how much other people media mentions and how we're helping other people write stories and when we get mentioned and who republishes our stuff. So I've been working on data viz at Sunlight for slightly over a year, and definitely starting at some point where we were just like, okay, we need a bar chart and maybe we can have hover states. So let's try a Google graph. And let's put red and blue because there are Republicans and Democrats. And so that was kind of like our first, let's do this thing because it's better than whatever R exported, which was disgusting. So R is great, but R is not a finished product. R gets you to where you need and helps you explore things, but nobody really wants to look at R. In my opinion, from a graphic designer. So we started there, and slowly we've gotten to the point where just this year I published an internal data viz style guide. And so after we've done a lot of work, we figured out, okay, these colors work best for Democrats and Republicans. These go with our company brand. These go with what we want our message to say. And so we've also found a place for our logo where people who republish our stuff don't rip it out automatically. It's harder to crop out, and so our stuff stays as our stuff more throughout. And so that's really helped us we've seen our graphics pop up where other people haven't retooled the data or retooled our graphics, that they've just taken them and published them whole. And maybe said something different about it or whatever, but that's a big win for me as a designer, where someone thinks that my stuff is good enough that they just use it. So that's kind of how we've evolved. Yeah.
So for USA Today, we do keep track of all of our traffic for our different data visualizations and things that are out there. And while it's not so much about, for interactives at least, it's not as much about page views as about how much time people spend, because like I mentioned before with that wide versus narrow view and letting people take the time to dig into the various layers, we always want to see how much people are actually doing that. And while there's certain topics that we always cover, like Oscars or things like that, where we might do an interactive, that will do really well, obviously during award season and things like that, but over time will start to taper off, whereas things that we've done around healthcare or the Princeton Review Best Value Colleges, where we list information about various schools and their tuition and financial aid information, over time those will, the traffic will rise and then it will fall and then it will pick up again over time. So we're always trying to pick topics that will, reemerge in the news and keeping a valuable resource and tool for people to use to find that kind of information, as opposed to something that might just be, really fun or pretty to do as a one-off, because they really do take a lot of time and resources to make them work across devices like iPad and desktop and various browsers and things like that. So we're always trying to do topics that will continue to be of interest to people.
Yeah, languages have come up a couple times so far, right? You started off with R, and yes, R is not for publishing, but R is very useful. But there's how many different languages are there? If you have to spit out two languages, I think R, Python, D3.js. What do you think of? JavaScript in general, but any specific frameworks, or just?
Raphael.js would be another one. It's kind of like a more simplified version of D3. It's also more simplified and also works across more browsers than D3, but these are all, as you said, JavaScript libraries for data visualization.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's thinking about what the product output is, right? So going on kind of from the bottom up, there's the, if you want to get really low level, you go to base JavaScript into Canvas for SVG, or a really popular mechanism is to use a tool called processing, which is actually a lightweight Java, but lets you do some really compelling visualization, essentially sketch visualization ideas and play with the data. Excel is really good at that too, but none of them are finished products, right? And R is really good for exploring things, not finished products. but at least can get you to where you're going, right? Can sketch and rapidly prototype ideas until you get to saying, this is what we want to do, this is the story, this is the way to visualize it. Because the further you get down that refinement path, the longer it's going to take. I think you just mentioned, especially when you think about the different devices. So make sure you're doing the right thing up front. Play it out. Do you usability testing on your visualizations? Do people, when they explore it, see the same story you intend them to see? Do that through, hopefully, just off-the-shelf tools. Once you like that, then you can dive into a framework and saying like a D3, a Raphael, a Chart.js, something else, and really craft a really great explore video.
Is there any language you use, though, to keep track of how people are interacting with the visualization, or is it just standard development tools?
I think that's probably more just whatever tracking or metrics you might use on your site. But to your point, I think it is good to have lots of different ways to prototype data visualizations because they do take a long time. So if you get too far down the path of doing something in D3 that might not be the greatest way to visualize something, you're less likely to scrap it because you've already spent so much time on it and effort. So it is really good to use even Google charting and Google Fusion tables. There's so many free things out there that you can use to prototype before you do start like digging into a lot of code to produce a complete visualization.
Yeah, I agree with that. And as much as I was hating on R earlier, there are so many ways to the end of to having a visualization, whether it's, through Illustrator or taking something that starts in R or even Excel, if you use it correctly, is not terrible. If you're just trying to do something basic or just get your idea out there, I think that's the main point, is to get your idea out there in a way that that you're able, and that conveys your message in a meaningful way. Like, I would say using Excel, all of their 3D things probably obscures your message more than you mean it to, so stay away from some of those. But not everything has to be in D3. Not everything has to be perfect. Just make sure you respect your data and get your message out there.
I don't really have anything to contribute to this.
Well, yeah.
Could you speak about the process, the editorial process, when you have the idea to when you roll out, and how long does it take? How do you coordinate that?
Yeah. So she's asking about the whole process of when you start developing things and when you start developing ideas to when it becomes an actual product, right? And Amy hated on R for a second, but then went even further back to Excel, which nobody likes to really see that. That's never going to be published on a site, right? And so it depends on who your audience is, right? Who you're communicating to. So yeah, let's go through that process for a second. How do you go about doing it, Andrew?
Oh, actually, I'd like to hear we talked about this before, I build tools that let people go build these visualizations, so I'm less involved in the end process. I think as colleagues here, I think you guys should probably talk about the process. I can hop in with other tools that might help that.
Sure. So I'm the end of the process at Sunlight. I'm going to start from the beginning, though. Is we've got a bunch of different data sets and about 14 developers on staff who intimately know those data sets. Like, each of our developers is responsible for something that either they've created or they intimately know, like campaign finance data and when something looks weird and dealing with those. So they'll assist in pulling data. We've got a data researcher on staff who does a lot of, when we're doing blog posts, does a lot of like the analysis. We just published something about revolving door lobbyists, which are people who come out of Congress or working with the government and immediately go in and get hired by a lobbyist firm, and how much they make in comparison to people who go into lobbying other ways. And so they did a lot of the analysis behind that and the thought process and the writing. And then I also work with a data analyst who takes some of that stuff and makes it cohesive in R and makes sure that we're outputting the right things and finding the right trends. And then it comes to me from R. And so my job is to make sure that that all goes with the brand and they're saying what they actually mean to say, and they're saying it in the best way that's visually possible. So it might be going back and brainstorming with them of like, okay, you have this point here. Can we show this through the data that's not a table? Can we show this graph in a slightly different thing because this thing doesn't, this trend line doesn't relate to any of your other points? So there's a lot of back and forth and a lot of brainstorming. And then we either decide to do if we have the resources and the time and we want to do something more customizable, we'll do something in D3, and it's a little bit more intensive, or we'll just do flat graphics, which are easily shareable and have a little bit less time intensity. So that's kind of the process of how we work, and I'm just on the end of that.
I think it really depends for us. Just the churn of content and the amount of stories and content we put out. I mean, at USA Today, I don't know the exact number, but in the prime time of the day, we're putting out 25 stories an hour just throughout the newsroom. So within that, there's a pretty wide range. I mean, there's the little stories, just sort of the one-offs that pop up. The news cycle lasts a day or two. For those sort of scenarios, we've actually created a set of templates and tools that are part of our CMS that anyone in the newsroom can use. So we'll have a graphics team up in the newsroom. They can design graphics or use images or just whatever the situation calls for. And basically any non-technical person can go into our CMS and just spin something up, in whatever amount of time they have available or is appropriate for the project. On the other side of that are just sort of our longer in-depth stories. I don't know if it's up there. Somewhere in here, we just finished fairly recently a big project on mass killings. Mass killings, as Maureen mentioned earlier, that's sort of an example of one of our more evergreen topics where it's something that it never really falls completely out of the news cycle. It has a longer lifespan, so we can devote more resources to that. So, I mean, really something that starts in the newsroom. Somebody from editorial will just start working on this project. They'll start researching it, whether they're writing a story, whether they're pulling data together. Maureen will help with that. That process sort of starts and gets underway. Once that sort of has some momentum, that's when really more of our team will start coming in, and we'll start really looking at that data. How are we going to pull this together? How are we going to present it in a meaningful way? Those projects take longer. I mean, those can take. I mean, I think mass killings probably took 6 months to really pull that together.
It took a lot longer than that.
It took a lot longer than that. I have an awareness of it for about 6 months, so yes, it's longer than that.
Well, but yeah, to Brian's point, most of the ideas, they do start in the newsroom, and they do start with the reporters try and have a lot of reporting done before they come to us and start getting ideas. Depending on who the reporter or the editor is, they'll start involving us really early because they know the process can take a long time, so they want us to be as informed of their story as possible. Mass killings was kind of unique because it started from what in the journalism world we call a noun project, as in there wasn't a real story. It was that Newtown had just happened, and the editor from USA Today said, oh, another mass shooting. We should really have a database of mass killings, and we should turn that into something. So we have a database team in the USA Today newsroom who started keeping track of all of the mass killings, which is technically defined as 4 people or more killed other than the shooter themselves. And so they started investigating the FBI database that had records of all of this and realized that it was very incomplete or inaccurate, and started filling in the holes with their own data and their own reporting, which ended up being a big part of the story, is that the mass killings, people think of Newtown or think of Aurora, but which is actually much more common are these family killings that involve 4 people or more, and that they happen way more often than we might think because they're not in the news very much, and that a lot of times it involves family members. So that whole story just came about. It actually is almost like more of a large, very interactive infographic than a story, because it's just presenting all this data in different ways that maybe people didn't have access to before because the FBI data was so incomplete. But that story started in the newsroom, eventually made its way downstairs, and then the larger it got, the more people that were pulled in, like designers, developers, and then also newsroom, and then also people from my team kind of all working together to make it what it became.
So I have a question about data sources. So when you're pulling together all these different data sources and they have been tracked in different ways, how do you then go in and clean up that data and make sure that you're comparing apples to apples?
Sure. So as far as at USA Today, we have a database team of database reporters who they are the ones that are going in there and cleaning up the data and making sure that it's all correct. When we do our own projects that don't necessarily involve their level of expertise, where my my current boss is actually used to run that exact team, so he's very invested in data and everything being accurate and correct and following all the particular rules of that. So that's probably like the cornerstone of everything we do, is making sure that all the data is accurate and that we can make these comparisons. Not that we just want to, or that we just want to shade something this way because it will look better, but that you can actually fairly and accurately say that this makes sense, because it doesn't matter what the presentation is or how beautiful it is. If your data isn't right, then it doesn't matter.
So yeah, I think data obviously is one of the keys where you're starting with, right? Obviously, it's part of this whole topic. And so if you're lucky enough to be at USA Today, and I imagine Sunlight's getting also a nice database team, but most people don't have a data team. You're really lucky if you do. Fortunately, there's a lot of open data initiatives coming out that are really making data more approachable, hopefully from the authoritative sources themselves. So obviously data.gov is one really popular one. There's more localized ones for local municipality you can search through. I have two that I'm working on. One's ArcGIS Online, and another's called GeoCommons, that are both full of tens of thousands of open data sets you can go and kind of explore and find. And you can also then, through each of these sites, look at who's used those data. So you can say, okay, here's the data from EPA, and here's all the metadata behind it in terms of how it was measured and when it was gathered, all these things that are important about timeliness, methodology, authoritativeness. And then a lot of them now you can see who's used this data, what maps or visualizations have they done with them, to get an idea about how to use them appropriately. What's been the feedback on them? Have they done them correctly or not? You can at least go and get inspired by, if not learn from those experiences. So again, myself, think as a platform developer that's not working on specific products or specific outputs, but on platforms, is try to make that as easy as possible for people that are one-person shops that need to do visualization. So there are a lot of tools showing up that make this easier to find that data.
And the Sunlight Foundation likes to produce some of those tools. We've got a number of APIs. We also do some lobbying to make more data sets open. And we started something called OCD, the Open Civic Data Standard. And so trying to pull in collaborators and people together to make sure that data sets are the same. And you can track Barack Obama over, his Senate campaign as well as his presidency and stuff like that.
So, I mean, these discussions, I hear a couple different points. This microphone is driving me a little nuts. A couple different points of view here, right? I myself have to do things that one person, maybe two, can do in a matter of a couple months. You have USA Today over there. You had a project that lasted more than 6 months and involved, it sounded like 8 to a dozen people at some point. Andrew, you're focusing on tools that take an entire industry and make them available to somebody like me through a platform. And what's the ratio? How much can you get done in data visualization depending on the money and the team that you have available to you?
I think there's a lot of tools that are free, right? I think one person can actually do a lot now, and that's something that's made a change in the last few years. Again, whether you can program, you can know JavaScript or processing. In an afternoon, you can build a visualization. These things are actually become very easy if you're a programmer, right? If you know Excel or point-and-click tools, there's a lot of now point-and-click tools out there that you can go and play with and prototype and do some really good, accurate visualizations, again, in an hour or two. So doing the visualization actually is pretty easy. It's finding and cleaning the data, as we talked about, and then actually telling the story around it. I think that are kind of the harder ones. You're going to kind of keep doing these cycles. You're going to have an idea, and you're going to find some data, or hopefully make some data around it, figure out how to visualize it, realize that doesn't quite right, you want to compare it to something else, you're going to have to search for more data and clean it up and then bring it back in and have these cycles. So you can do that very quickly for one cycle, and then you kind of iteratively improve it over time. So I think like any skill, it's something you just need to start doing and build that skill set over time. It's kind of like drawing or painting or programming, that you're going to see something else out there you like, and you should try and copy it or mimic it, right? Say, I can take USA Today's or Sunlight Foundation's data. I'm going to take that same data, I'm going to make it into a different kind of chart or a different kind of map and learn how to do that, and then kind of build that skill set and play with that, and then do it again. And over time, you'll get better. You'll then be able to do it even faster or either more quickly, or you'll be able to try out some new ideas. You'll do some kind of interesting bubble chart on top of a map instead of just dots on a map or something like that. So I encourage you just to play and experiment with it, and also find people you trust that do know it, that you can share that with, whether it's On Twitter, there's a lot of people that are experts in domains or with data visualization. You can ping them and send them a copy. Here's my visualization. Have I normalized it by population or not? Am I using the right color ramps that are good for people who might have color blindness, which is a really common thing you might overlook, and they'll say, oh, check out this tool. You can always try it against this tool. And then there's great local meetups for people here. So Sean, for example, runs data visualization and data community ones. There's a lot of those. You mentioned another one, the data journalism ones. There's also communities here you can bring and show them to. So experiment and play with it, and then get some really good feedback from people that know, and you'll learn pretty quickly.
I think one other tip, though, that I have is make sure you take the time to understand your data and make sure that you're not comparing apples to bananas and that you're doing it the right way, and ask people for help. Like, Twitter is also a great community to reach out to, and there's a bunch of open source stuff out there.
So I think that, I think like the work that Andrew's doing, I think that's really, I really think that's important. We have similar tools. They're proprietary. They're for us only. You guys will never, ever see them. This is all really sort of new stuff, I think. Journalism schools are just starting to realize this, but it's sort of a tricky situation because you really do, to do this by yourself, you really have to be a pretty solid developer, and you have to have a lot of coding knowledge that most people don't have at this point, or at least the people that are doing these data visualizations and putting these stories together don't necessarily have. So I think journalism schools are starting to identify this as something they need to solve for. Maureen's part of that movement, I would say. But I think you creating those tools and the kind of things you're doing, I think really makes this it's not really a new communication tool, but I think it's just a growing communication tool.
Well, I think it's similar to like what blogging did to, maybe good or bad to bring up with professional journalists, but essentially by, quote, democratizing the tools, making them easily approachable, accessible, makes it people can start experimenting. So now, just think you could be sitting right here and publish whatever you're thinking to millions of people in a second, right? That was a huge change to let people, in terms of learn and explore. Can we do the same thing for data science and data visualization in terms of make those tools really accessible?
I think that's a really good comparison. Back in the olden days, like 10 or 15 years ago, like you walk down to you either had your newspaper delivered, or you walked down to the convenience store and you had one or two to select from, but all of a sudden the internet came along, and now you can read any newspaper in the world just as easily as you can read your local newspapers. So newspapers moved digital and they became accessible. It also created a new outlet, a new medium for people to become their own journalists. So blogs came, and that movement now, maybe this is another part of that. So now these tools come along, and now anybody can visualize data.
And kind of because there are so many tools, and because you can make something that looks so polished so quickly, there's a lot of room for error there too if you don't understand what you're doing. And people don't critique data visualization sometimes as much as they should. They're like, oh, it's a graphic, it must be real. All of these things must be 100% true because it's like a photograph. It's telling me something that's actually there. Whereas you have to take a little bit more of a critical eye to everything and to data visualization with that too, and make sure that they are using the right sources, they are showing you labels for their data, and they are like starting at zero and just not skewing the data to make their point.
So one comment about that for people, because you all gather really good data and you put up these really great visualizations. How often do you link to your source data saying, here's my viz, and much like a scientist should, and here's the data I used to get it, so that people can go and independently verify that? Because you could tell something that's really compelling, but until people have access to understand themselves, they could always question it.
We do try to do that with some of our projects where we'll have a hyperlink at the bottom that says, click this link to download the data set that we used for this. I don't know how often people actually do that.
I've done that.
But regular people.
I'm not normal.
But we try to make it available, and also it's sort of like the saying that we use just to determine how sound the data is like the idea of, if you were just a reporter writing a story, you interview people and you ask them lots of questions, and you might ask them the same question in a few different ways to make sure that you're getting the same answer. It's the same thing with your data. You really have to interview your data, because even government agencies make mistakes in their data sets sometimes too, and have wrong averages and things like that. So you have to make sure that before you put something out there that your data is sound by interviewing your own data.
I would look more critically at any visualization that I see that doesn't have sources, it doesn't have methodology, and it doesn't have labels. Those to me are three key things that, like, okay, are they actually showing me everything? Are they actually doing their research right? And is this accurate?
Yeah, we got a couple questions, actually. I wonder if this thing will reach. Untangle it. No need?
Several of you mentioned APIs, and there's a lot of apps that do things, and all this different stuff that's available so that anyone can create visualizations, as I think you said. But is there any sort of an organization or any place where people can go who are just trying to create a one-off visualization for a client where we don't have a visualization team, we don't have a data team, to know that what we're downloading, that the API is actually reliable, that it's going to respect the data, as you were saying before? Is there any sort of, because there's a lot out there, is there any sort of oversight?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a consultant. You can hire me, or you can come to my events with Data Visualization DC, but I'll let these guys answer it.
Yeah, I don't know if there's, I would say Twitter, as you've already mentioned, right? There are a lot of communities there. There are people that are pretty well known there. I think you meant, there's one, I wasn't sure if you were asking about how to learn or how to get it critiqued and evaluated.
You know, if you've got a data set, you know what you want to do, but you've got all these different things that you could download or use to do it. How do you know
What to use.
what's going to be used?
Are you looking for the software?
I'm just asking a generic question.
So, I mean, I would actually, one of the best ones is check out Flowing Data. Nathan Yao has its tremendous blog in terms of he just covers a lot of different visualizations out there and critiques them himself and what's good and bad about them. He also has a lot of really good tutorials. He has 2 books out now, and he's also at least, maybe he's too busy now, but he's been pretty approachable as well. And then you can look at there, I think there's a community kind of buzzing around that as well. So if there's one resource I would check out, it would be Flowing Data. There's a lot of other ones too, but it's a good start.
Yeah, and if you're looking for the data itself, make sure your APIs have good documentation, that they're working correctly. At least at the Sunlight Foundation, we have a page with all of our APIs, and it shows you where their documentation is, and there's a little like status bar of, is this thing down, is this correct, and we're always available to like answer questions and that sort of thing. But again, like, there's a lot of resources out there. It can be incredibly overwhelming. I had to go through that. There's a big learning curve. Just keep doing it and keep finding things and keep reaching out.
Another good resource, and this doesn't even have to be specifically for journalists, is the National Institute of Computer Assisted Reporting, is this organization, and they have an email list, that listserv that anyone can sign up for, and it's full of like database journalists, people that have been researching, reporting around data and complicated data sets for their entire careers, and people are always reaching out and emailing saying, how do I get this FEC data, or can I technically visualize this way? And like everyone is very open and honest and willing to help other people, and they will all email back and give suggestions and advice. And like I said, it goes beyond journalism too, because data visualization is becoming really popular, and it's not just journalism anymore. It's data science. It's all of these different fields that have vested interests in how all of this comes together. So I think it's a really exciting time to be involved in it, because so many other groups of people and information architects and all kinds of people are becoming interested in data visualization. So there's no shortage of people that are willing to help and give advice about any kind of question that you might have.
If time and resources weren't an issue, what sort of scenario? Yeah, in that lovely fantasy world.
We're hypotheticals now.
Yeah, we're in hypotheticals. What sort of scenarios would you recommend a static graphic that's easy to share via social media, very right click and save kind of thing, versus something like an interactive D3? When is which preferable?
I think it depends on whatever you're trying to show. Like, sometimes all you need is a bar chart. So if that data is fairly simple, or the interesting part of that data is fairly simple, then there's nothing wrong with just using a bar chart or a pie graph if that's what best communicates your message. Oftentimes, I think there are some bad data visualizations out there that could have been a lot more simple and easy for people to understand, but instead someone wanted to blow it up into this huge thing that doesn't make any sense. So I think it really has to depend on what your data is and what you're trying to show, what the best method is. There's no shame in a bar chart or a well thought out line graph.
I'm going to keep going with some questions here. I don't think it's going to reach if you want to.
Come on down.
Sorry, my question is for Sean. In defense of pi,
Thank you.
in defense of pi, I mean, we're used to bar charts, scatter graphs, pie charts, and we're used to this conceptual idea of a map. So we're used to these things in terms of mental frameworks. But in terms of this is really relates to that relationship between art, science, and math. And this is actually just a representation, really, of enormous potential in terms of the geometry of nature, really. We can think of x cubed, and it's a cube. But we can think of a really complex formula. We have no idea what that is, and we can visualize those things. So even though he doesn't have labels and data points here, this is another tool, like you're developing tools to represent data or to represent visualizations of things. And we can look at healthcare, other areas, and these tools are going to be more familiar to us in the future. But so my question to you is, in terms of application of data visualization, utilizing these types of tools, give us an example or two of the application. Because this is pi, but you can apply this to many different things. And I'm not a data scientist, but if that's a clear question. Because it's not just something that looks nice. It's not just
So
something
the
pretty.
question is how do you, first of all, am I allowed to field questions? Because I'm supposed to be moderating this thing. I don't know if that, I'll get arrested.
We'll allow it.
My question is, because it's been, this is something that looks pretty, but actually, this is just
So it's
representing
like,
pi, but it's really something quite more deep in terms of tools we'll be able to use in terms of data.
what's the practical application of visualizing these kind of mathematical structures or something like that, or anything that was previously just a set of numbers, and why put it in a geometric structure like this? What's the value
How
of
is it
that?
something other than just it's pretty? Really?
Yeah, well, so I know you've had these. I'm going to go right to Amy because she bashed it to begin with.
Well, no, this is like everybody else. It's a different type of tool.
No, it's okay. Fighting's good. I got some Irish in me.
Students.
I'm going to throw down right here. That thing's on, right? So you mentioned that things should be labeled, the axes should be clear, there should be numbers and everything like that. I look around the world and people don't have axes or labels, and people don't talk about their own methods. But we still are able to look at the patterns and the shapes of things relative to each other, and we're able to make some sense of it, right? So one of the questions that I get when I show people that is like, well, how far down does it go? Or it seems to be spiraling. Why does it seem to spiral like that? And one of the cool things about representing things in terms of a geometric shape is that it begs a question. And usually if you set it up right, the question that it begs is exactly what you want, where you're trying to direct the person. So physical representation naturally begs questions down a certain rabbit hole, and that's where you're trying to guide them anyway. So you don't need any labels or anything like that. They're just naturally curious. Now, of course, they can't find it out if you're not there to answer it, so that's a problem. And you also can't, if it's not an interactive visualization, so that way somebody can, so on that particular one, I don't know, Lisa, can you do it right now? I think you can actually select one of the squares if that's, yeah. So just go like to the center, more towards the center. There you go, and just click on it. See if this works. I haven't actually tested it. Yeah, and Amy is grasping for the, and see right now, see this is where the data science comes in. So right now it's loading a full resolution preview. So it's at a lower resolution right now in order to show what you see. And then once she clicks on it, it's going back and doing some data munging, and now it's recreated the detail, right? So that by itself wasn't maybe the best screenshot of it, but that's a way to zoom in and zoom out.
So I will say that you can argue the merits of this or not, but I don't think we should undervalue the value of cool. I mean, it's sort of like a page view. A page view doesn't really tell you, like when you're measuring your metrics, a page view tells you nothing about the page. It tells you about the decision someone made before they came to that page. So, I mean, we do need to grab people, and if cool is one of the tools we use to grab people's attention, I say go for it. I mean, it doesn't, people can't engage with it until they make a decision to engage with it, essentially.
Sure, and I think there's something to be said for cool. I also think there's a difference between data design and data art. I don't call myself an artist. I will illustrate things, but it's not for the purpose, my own purposes, or for looking pretty. It's for using it as a tool to communicate something. And I think this is data art, whereas I'm more into data design, which is using it as a tool to communicate something greater and picking the method because of my other goals.
Which is a perfect lead into the next question that I had, which is data visualization an art or a science?
It's both. I mean, it depends on what you're going to do with it, right? If you're inspiring people, then it can be an art, right? It can get people excited and dive into it, then it could be the science for how you're evaluating or conveying something, right? If you're inspiring someone, you're one thing. If you're trying to change policy or people's decision-making processes, it's something else. I was going to mention that this reminds me of fractals. Right, this reminds me of Mandelbrot and Hibbert, space-filling curves, whereas actually they didn't show the axes. That was the real and imaginary axes, but people could visualize things. And mostly those fractals were really cool art. But then through that and got people inspired, they learned about nonlinearity dynamics and magnetic curves and Hibbert space-filling curves, which are now actually used for really great database design. So I think one kind of feeds the other, even though they have different uses.
I have to jump on that one because the fractal nature of data and the way that it visualizes. So a lot of CG these days is done using, oh, you think it's my phone? That would make sense. A lot of CG these days is done using chaos mathematics, which is then visualized. So when you see mountainous landscapes, or is anybody here a Star Wars fan? You see the, I've got a couple head nods. Do you see the lightsaber scene between Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan at the end of the third, where he becomes Darth Vader? All of that lava spewing up into the air is all chaos mathematics and visualization of that fractal geometry. Obviously, they didn't fight in a lava pit, right? So, but that's how they did it. You know.
Becomes Darth Vader, what?
Yeah. Oh, spoiler! Anyway, Brian, you look like you're about to say something.
Oh, no, I was just trying to think of something witty to say. I've got nothing.
Yeah, I was wondering if anyone has any. I want to hear some more questions
Yeah,
because I'm tired of hearing myself.
If the mic only goes so far, so if you want to come up to the center aisle.
I can ask my question.
Okay.
So, each of these few things that we do tend to end up as isolated pieces. There's a data visualization corner, there is an infographics corner, so it seems like it's so important to start thinking about all of these different things that aid communication as part of an integrated whole. So I like when you talked about the story. It's a story that demands a certain way of explaining something. So in the context of a website, for example, I would say, is it appropriate? When do you think data visualization is appropriate? When do you think video would be appropriate? How are those kind of conversations had in a team where everyone's going towards the same goal of communicating?
So I think the question is, when do you choose to use a data visualization over a static graphic versus a video versus text versus any other communication mediums?
I think it has to be with whatever is the best medium for that part of the story. So, for example, a project I'm working on now, we are doing some interactives for certain parts that involve mapping and showing the relationship between where a certain thing is versus where another thing is, where something is happening a lot. But then there's also a piece of it that is a very complicated explainer. So that someone is doing is like a motion graphic, because it's something that can be laid out, step by step, and then people can watch and kind of get an idea. So it really there's always going to be you know, different ways you can, a photo, a video, a data viz could tell the same thing, so just depends on what is the best out of those and how you decide what is the best. And a lot of times it is coming to a consensus with photographers and videographers and graphic artists about what the best way to do that is, but we always try to think about how it would be easiest for the reader to understand.
Yeah, I think it's going to be important, probably increasingly so, is also think about the medium of consumption. Is this something that someone's going to read on their mobile phone? Going back to the question about a static image versus a D3 infographic. If someone's going to be reading this on the metro and pulling this up and seeing this on a tiny screen, you probably don't want something to have to click and zoom on, right? So you can almost imagine responsive visualizations, right? I pulled it up in my phone, it's an image. If I then open my desktop, it becomes a full-blown interactive graphic that maybe walks me through a tour first of a story, and then actually then says, okay, cool, now go nuts, build your own story or something like that. So I think we're going to see more kind of progressive enhancement of those visualizations. So it's not just a video or just a static image. It's depending on your context and your audience.
I'll speak. I know the technology is evolving very quickly, and a lot of data can be visualized very sexy and very useful. Right? So, what are the limitations or the challenges that you're facing, in these days to present the data? Can you come across it in your experience and knowledge?
Internet Explorer is a very big challenge. I mean, if you want to talk about just from a technology perspective, because there are so many cool visualization libraries out there and things that you can play with and do that will work great on your local host and your machine and will look beautiful, and then someone will open them in IE8 and they do not look the same. So I think coming up with like fallback solutions and watching the number of IE8 users hopefully drop below a certain level to where we don't have to care about them as much anymore. Things like that, I think definitely, it's like browsers and different devices and detecting different devices, because there is no hover on an iPhone or an iPad, there is a touch, so you have to build in the solution for both. And you have to tell your graphic, if this is a desktop, then this will be hover, if not, it will be touch. So I'd say browsers and working across devices, because about over 40% of our traffic now is through our mobile devices, so we can no longer say that this just doesn't work on mobile. If it doesn't work on mobile, it just doesn't work. So those are probably the two of the biggest technological hang-ups I think that we face.
Yeah, definitely those, and time and resources too. I'm working in in-house shop, and we only have one videographer, and we've got 14 developers, but they can't all work on the same project, and so deeming stories that we want to put all of those resources at, rather than something that's just simple, more one-off, and we don't want to spend as much time on. So if we had all the resources in the world and all the time, that would be different, but that doesn't work with news and breaking stories.
I agree with that too.
And not to beat on the same drum, but I think data, it's either you have too little of it, or at least questionable and mixed, or you have too much of it, right? It's actually getting more easy to actually have too much data. So how do you visualize, a million rows, right? You need to do some really interesting aggregations or selection on that, and that becomes increasingly the other kind of new problem than the dearth of data.
I'd say there's quite a bit of data science behind visualizing a million rows. So we got time for one more question.
So the question is, once you start getting into data visualization, right, you're dealing with underlying data sets, and if you're building visualizations from the point of view of supporting like journalism narratives, you have kind of a different level of statistical fidelity you have to reach than if you're building visualizations for like a scientific organization. So if you are going down the road building visualizations, what are some resources that you recommend in terms of making sure that you are not making the wrong choices that you'll get criticized for? Because it's not just you have to have fidelity to the statistics, but you can get criticized for. It's like, well, why did you use that type of chart? It's like you use this type of chart when you're dealing with these type of statistics, and that might be something that's hard to know unless you've got the statistics back.
I think it's even more than just you've upset people, is that people's lives and are at stake in a lot of these visualizations. In school, we learned a lot about the Challenger incident, and that was really about a data visualization problem, that they tried to make a case why the shuttle should not launch in cold weather, and because of bad charts, they launched.
People use that exact same.
I mean, that's a common. So if you read Tufte, he highlights it heavily there, or also millions of dollars. We do mapping stuff that ends up people citing buildings or funding state education, right? If we get it wrong, it means that the wrong thing was done and it takes 10 years to recover from that. So I think that's where you get into the hardcore data science. You need to learn statistics. You need to go and really learn up and do different tools and get it validated and vetted. Treat it like a real scientific research and experiment that real decisions can be made with this, and you need to make sure you're doing the right thing.
I would just add that there's a lot of websites and blogs out there devoted to data journalism, like we talked about flowing data. There's so many different sites out there that give not only introductory kind of explainers on this is when you would use a line versus a pie, but also just general tips and tricks for using data visualization.
Some other quick ones. There's a really good thin book, very readable, the Wall Street Journal's Guide to Data
Oh,
Visualization.
to Guide to Information Graphics?
Yeah, it's
Yes.
great. It's like just like how to start your pie chart at 12 o'clock and go big one way, secondary. That's a really nice one to read. Noah Elinsky is I think he's at IBM now. He's bounced around. He has a lot of really good research and publishes out a couple books. O'Reilly has a few books on data visualization and data science that you can totally check out. What other resources to close out?
Also, if you look on Twitter, there's the hashtag DataViz is used a ton by many different people in many different fields that all have lists and links to different things.
Okay, and that's it. So if we can have a round of applause for our panel.